One of the great things about rule changes in Formula One is that you get different approaches from the teams, and we get a bit of mixed up car design. Basically, we see different things from the different cars in the pit lane, and over the years that follow before the next rule change, we do tend to see a bit of convergence and the best ideas are copied. But we're at the start of a new rules phase here, and that means there are different pieces across the grid effectively that we can take a look at now. And we've tasked our technical expert Jake Boxall-Legge with building his ultimate Formula One car for 2019 from all the designs we've seen. We've said that he can pick as many bits or pieces from any car that he wants, and we've got quite a lot of variety actually. So I'm going to throw to Jake and I'm going to give him a part of a car. He's going to tell us which one's his favourite. And a slight disclaimer at the start is that we completely understand that if you link all these pieces together, you're not going to get a car that works very well. We know that the car has to be joined up from front to back, but that's not the point of this video. We're picking out the pieces we find most interesting, or that JBL finds most interesting. So, as always, we're at the front wing to begin with, and a slight clue, it's the Alfa Romeo. Take it away, JBL.
Yeah, so out of all of the designs we've seen over the off-season, I think this is probably the one that stood out the most, wasn't it? We know Ferrari and Toro Rosso also came up with slanting the wing down this way, but Alfa Romeo have brought it to a new extreme, especially when you've got a whole new front wing formula that you're allowed to make it a lot deeper. You've got a larger bounding box to work with. And it's just interesting. They've said, okay, we could use all of that, but it's more useful if we don't, if we shape it in this way to drive flow around the outside of the front tyres and then ensure that you're bringing the rest of the car into play a little bit more just by trying to pen the tyre wake in. So yeah, it's just such an interesting design, isn't it? I don't think we've seen a front wing quite as mad like that for a few years, and it's just brilliant that someone's come into a new set of regulations off the bat and said, okay, look, let's do it like this.
Let's move on. We're staying in the front area of the car, but we're moving to the nose now. And here you've chosen something that only appeared in the second test.
Yep, so I've gone for the Mercedes nose on this one. Over the last few seasons, they've done something very, very different to the rest of the teams. Everyone else has gone for a little sort of thumb tip appendage there just to pass the crash structure requirements. Mercedes haven't done that. They've gone with something different, and every year it seems to get thinner and thinner, especially at the mounting point here. And then, yeah, they've changed it for the second test. It's now a little bit smoother here just to ensure the air spills over a little bit more and you're driving a little bit more airflow along this cape section here and creating a little bit more front end downforce. After the first test, the drivers weren't too happy about the handling, and it's like they knew that in advance, so they changed it and drivers were a lot happier with it. Sure, there's a few differences here and there, like McLaren have a different nose to Racing Point, for example, but Mercedes have really stuck to their guns on this one, so I think I've got to give this one the nod.
Now we can see further back on the car, barge boards remain incredibly complex on F1 cars, but it's not the Mercedes barge boards that we're talking about next. You've chosen perhaps one of their rivals for that part of the car.
So yeah, so I've gone for the Red Bull barge boards on this one. I think this particular specification, which was day 3 of testing in Barcelona, I think they're in slightly smaller bits now after Gasly's shunt, but it's just a really interesting concept. A lot of teams have been employing these tiny little turning vanes here, and that's just to be a little bit aggressive in taking airflow from the front end and then being able to work that towards the barge board. But I like the Red Bull. It sort of blends simplicity with complexity, if that makes sense. You've got these sort of 3 lead panels here and they all interlink together. You've got a little few serrations here that's just, again, trying to just be proactive and turning that flow into something useful, especially from the massive wake you're going to get from this tyre, and especially as it turns around as well. You need all of these parts to work for a variety of steering angles. This is a new part on the Red Bull here. They've sort of broken up the side pod appendages into 2 bits here, and then there's just this massive fin here as well. Top down it looks like something from a manta ray or something like that. I just think it's, honestly, I could be very technical about it, I just think it's really cool.
Now just behind the barge boards we of course have the side pods, and this has become an increasingly interesting area of development in F1, mainly as the teams do more and more with their packaging, and I can see a time in the future where side pods basically disappear at the rate we're going at the moment, but we've split the side pods into 2 parts. We're going to do the top and the bottom separately, and the top, this one didn't come as a surprise to me when you mentioned it. You've chosen the Ferrari.
Yeah, so I kind of had to go for the Ferrari really because it's a design that's almost theirs. They've pioneered it, and you can just see why you do it immediately. You've got the suspension elements here, and you've got all of this clearance here, just making that inlet just so much more open, and it means that you can make it a little bit smaller. You can bring it higher up, and then use this crash structure here to sort of define it almost, and you can just see how sort of thin the top is in comparison, and it just allows Ferrari to add a few extra sections here, play with the little turning vanes a little bit. It gives them a lot more latitude with what they can do with it, and we've seen these designs first of all be adopted by a lot of other teams on the grid. I think 9 out of 10 teams have them now, all barring Mercedes, and they're getting smaller and smaller all the time. Red Bull's is almost letterbox size, and I could have gone with that, but I was worried that we'd have a little bit too much of Red Bull in that area, so I thought I'd give the nod to Ferrari. This is very much their design, and they're just continuing to push it a little bit more.
It's a potential spoiler that there's more Red Bull to come then.
Ooh.
Well, where we're moving to next is the lower part of the side pod, and we're not talking Ferrari, Red Bull or Mercedes here. We're diving back into the midfield.
So I've gone for McLaren on this one, which is probably a little bit of a surprise, but when I got to see it at the launch, I was just really sort of taken aback by how tight it is, and towards the end everybody's been going for an undercut in the last few years, just to try and direct as much airflow towards the rear of the car as possible. Sidepods used to be huge and bulky, and that would spoil a lot of diffuser performance, so trying to get that undercut has been really helpful. But McLaren have tightened their side pods up so much that as you get towards the rear end, you almost don't need it. There is a noticeable undercut here. Basically, the only thing that's keeping the side pod this size is because they need to have radiators in the side pods and maybe a few other components as well. So yeah, it's just fantastic to see McLaren push the boundaries a little bit more. When they first started with Honda, they wanted a size 0 concept, but now they're with Renault, they're able to push it a little bit more.
So effectively, while you can see an undercut here, what you're saying is here there isn't really one anymore because they've made this part so small as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So everything is just so concentrated in the front, and all of the hybrid components are getting a lot smaller and a lot more efficient, and you don't need as much room. Remember in 2014 when the Formula first began, everyone had really chunky cars. Now everybody's sort of getting on top of it and being able to work with it a little bit harder.
Let's move up a little bit from here. Engine cover and the air intake around the roll hoop. Interesting area this, because the teams have taken a lot of different approaches. Some of them are quite bulky at the moment to meet, I guess, the cooling requirements for the various internals. But you've found one that you believe is particularly tidy, should we say?
So yeah, I've gone for Ferrari again on this one. It's a bit of a trend because I've gone with Ferrari inlet here and inlets here, but that kind of matches up together.
That probably tells us something, doesn't it, about their engine?
Oh yeah, it tells you that they've got their cooling really sorted over the off-season. So when the Haas first launched, that was very, very tight in this particular area, and that kind of gave a clue to what Ferrari would run. But everybody else has gone for big circular intakes here that split into different ways to keep MG UK cool, to provide the engine with the right airflow and various other component cooling as well. But Ferrari have almost turned that on its head a little bit and broken it up into 2 apertures here. There's also another one here that you can just about see behind the halo, behind the driver's head. And that's all, again, trying to divert cooling to various engine components, provide the engine with the right airflow it needs to work. But Ferrari have done this in a very, very tidy fashion as well. And again, this is very, very tight here, which gives them a lot more to play with when it comes to this shark fin section here. And that's just ensuring that when the airflow comes off of this engine cover here, it doesn't turn into this mass of turbulent air that it so frequently does. It gives the chance to sort of straighten up before it gets to the rear wing. So it's really important that Ferrari are able to do this from an engine standpoint and an aerodynamic standpoint as well.
So that's effectively a shrink-wrapped F1 engine cover, isn't it? And shrink-wrapped is probably what we're going to be talking about next, because we get into the general rear packaging of the cars, and I think it was inevitable that we were going to go back to Red Bull here. As we said in their launch video, they've cut Honda no slack whatsoever, potentially been too ambitious with the packaging. But let's take a look, a detailed look from a good angle at just how tight the rear end of the Red Bull is.
Yeah, so as you can see, this is just very, very tight. This is Adrian Newey's hallmark, isn't it? His real calling card. It's what we call a Coke bottle shape. So as you can see, it's like the bottle, and then it just tapers in as you go further down the car. And yeah, it's like how things were in 2013 before the turbo era began almost. And again, this is something that Red Bull might have to change a little bit in time for Australia, because them and Honda did push packaging very, very hard, and it might be too hard. They might have been a little, as you say, a little bit too ambitious. But what this does, it just ensures there's so much more floor area to play with. And when it comes to diverting air to the top end of the diffuser and around all of the little winglets that live on the rear brake ducts, it just gives them so much more space to play with, and it creates a little bit more of a suction effect when it comes to the rear of the car. So rather than having a massive blockage here that you have to kind of work your way around, it just gives Red Bull so much space to play with. It's just nicely, neatly tapered here. Airflow neatly passes over the top as well and just slides down. That's what's called the Coanda effect, when it follows a curved surface down. So it's just very, very tidy. It's fantastic to look at, and I hope they don't change it too much in Australia, because it's really cool.
Now, we always start our technical discussions, it seems, with the front wing, so it makes total sense to end with the rear wing. And this one's quite nice, but we're not going to be talking about Red Bull here, are we? We're moving to a team that probably wants to get on the back of this and wants to challenge Red Bull quite a lot and be stuck under this rear wing quite a bit, and that's the Renault.
So yeah, I've gone with this one just because it's got a lot of appendages to it. There's a lot of detail here. It's a lot different to what they launched with. That was very conventional in that sense.
Bland. You can say bland.
I'll say bland. But they turned up for testing with really interesting end plates, using this section between the two mountings. It's a little monkey seat almost. The rear wing itself, the top two aerofoil panels, they'll change during the season. Teams always do that. They're very track specific, so in Baku they'll turn up with something different. They'll probably turn up with something different in Monaco and then Monza. There's a lot of different variations there, but these end plates I think are a real point of interest. Everybody has started to gravitate towards these overhanging strake sections here, and that just ensures that because there's a closer overlap with the rear tyres, that just means that they're able to just turn the airflow being chucked off of them into something a little bit more useful, tidy it up a little bit and reduce the amount of drag that's being produced. But they can also use these very small mounting sections here as almost slight downforce generators in a sense. They can just boost the output of the rear wing.
So that's this section here, isn't it? The yellow paint gives us quite a clear indication of that.
Yeah, so it's not going to produce a whole lot, but every little helps, right? So that's another interesting thing. And then if you just look between the end plate and the rear wing section.
So in here?
Yeah, so this is something that Gary Anderson pointed out the other week, and I've been finding quite interesting. That's kind of a grace sort of section between the end plate and the rear wing. They allow a certain amount of space, and so by making the end plate as thin as possible, they can essentially bypass the rear wing rules where you can only have two elements and create, I don't know, 5 or 6 if you're ambitious enough, and that just keeps airflow a lot more attached. Vortices often turn up at this point of the wing where it attaches to the end plate, and that just offers a little bit more control over that. And then again, you're not met with this huge draggy mess from behind the rear wing. You're able to control it a little bit more, and so you're not getting a bunch of backdraft that's just going to spoil your rear components.
So that's the full car, and basically what you're telling us is that by the end of the season, all of the cars will be a composite that you've just laid out for us.
Well, I'm hoping that someone comes up with a completely wild innovation, but that would be quite a cool car to see, I think.